PR Connections Radio presents.
Welcome to Vegas Hockey Hub here on PRConnectionsRadio.com, the voice of new media. I'm your host, Ian Rakelli. And on this edition of Vegas Hockey Hub, we are going to be discussing and talking about the progress and really how this season has gone for former first-round pick of your Vegas Golden Knights, Brendan Brisson. And this is going to be a good kind of follow-up video. We talked about him last season as he was heading into the minors. Now we are talking about him as he has had a little bit of a cup of coffee in the NHL. Before we do that, go to PRConnectionsRadio.com, voice of new media. Check out all the new content we have on the network, including Vegas Hockey Hub. And also, we have to talk about our sponsor, PaidPerLetter.com. So if you go to the website and then use the _ Uncle Dan, and then you can actually help out and support PaidPerLetter.com. So once again, I just want to quickly mention Paid Per Letter. And if you use the / Uncle Dan, and it'll be right here. So Paid Per Letter / Uncle Dan. And definitely appreciate them coming on board and helping out with PR Connections Radio. So getting into Brendan Brisson, I mean, this is a guy who was a first-round pick back in 2020. This is someone who the Vegas Golden Knights have had, someone who, the organization has been able to really use as of the last couple of years in the minors. But how has he done in terms of progression? How has Brendan Brisson really taken off ever since he was drafted? Because, look, it's one thing to be selected in the first round. I mean, that happens every single year in the NHL, right? Every NHL team, every draft, there are players who are first-round picked that have high potential and have ability to become good someday. But what can you do once you eventually get into the minors, once you are eventually now playing professional hockey? How do you grow? How do you develop? How do you progress when it comes to Brendan Brisson? And that's really what we're going to be talking about on this edition of Vegas Hockey Hub. Because Brendan Brisson, when we did the first video about him back in 2022, 2023, in season 1 of Vegas Hockey Hub, I talked to you about what he did leading up into it, right? That's what I was talking about. I was talking about what has he done, as a junior, what he was doing in minor hockey, what he was doing in college hockey with University of Michigan. That's really what we were focusing on when we did the first video on Brendan Brisson this past season. What this season really is, what the follow-up video for Brendan Brisson is about, is how has he done in Henderson this year? How has he played? How has he done in the 41 games he has suited up for the Henderson Silver Knights? And then we will briefly talk about the 8 games that he has played as a member of the Vegas Golden Knights, as you see right there. That is the jersey that he was wearing during his debut for the Vegas Golden Knights. And very cool moment there. The Nashville Predators was his NHL debut. We'll talk about that more in detail when we get there. So to give you more of the background on Brendan Brisson, this is a guy who was a first-round pick back in 2020. He came from California, played with Team USA when it came to the World Juniors. But what I've noticed and what I've been able to appreciate about Brendan Brisson is that he is learning, he's taking his bumps, he is progressing as a hockey player. And, seeing him in Henderson over the last couple of months, you really have been able to see that there are games where he is on it. There's games where, he has been on the top 6 in the AHL. He's doing good with his line mates, and he is making everybody more overall a better player. So after having a preseason and having a few good games in the preseason for the Vegas Golden Knights, in fact, there was some speculation that maybe he would be on the NHL roster, considering how well he did in the preseason for Vegas. Unfortunately for him, that just did not happen for Brendan Brisson. But here's what I did notice about him, is that in the preseason, when I was at T-Mobile Arena, when I was at those preseason games, he seemed more comfortable when it came to getting the puck to his teammates, when it came to being in the offensive zone, when it came to the loose puck, when opportunities to take advantage of the loose puck. Brendan Brisson was showing that he can get better over time. And it really seemed like he was starting to develop and get into his own pattern in the preseason, in those games that he played for Vegas. So he then gets optioned down. He goes back to the minors. He starts the season with the Henderson Silver Knights. And it only took 2 games of the AHL season for him to make an impact, as the Henderson Silver Knights would take on the Iowa Wild. And in game 2 of the season, he would have his first goal of the season with an assist earlier in the night. So a 2-point game for Brendan Brisson on October 14th against the Iowa Wild. He even got his first penalty minutes of the season as well. So Brendan Brisson was everywhere. He was effective in that game against the Iowa Wild with a goal, an assist, and a penalty in this game for Brendan Brisson. And then a couple of days later, they would take on the San Jose Barracudas here at the Dollar Loan Center in Henderson. And the San Jose Barracudas, they would win, actually, and score a goal in that game for Brendan Brisson. So back-to-back games for Brendan with having a goal for the Henderson Silver Knights. So 2 goals in the first 3 games of the season. Not bad for somebody like him. Fast forward towards the end of October, and after having a goal against the San Jose Barracudas on October 25th, and then getting a goal on October 29th against the San Diego Gulls, he would end the month of October with 4 goals and 6 points. Not bad for Brendan Brisson. Overall, in those first 8 games of the season, the fact that he was averaging a little under a point per game, and the fact that he had a goal in half of the games in October, Brendan Brisson was really showing potential. You had Diancenko, he was showing some potential there. You had Adam Cracknell, the veteran, who was really taking off and showing that he had pace in the AHL. You had some good supporting characters like Sheldon Rempel. You had Gage Quinney, Byron Fries. The Vegas Golden Knights minor league system does have some really good players in it. You had some energy and hustle from Mason Morelli as well on that organization. But Brendan Brisson having 6 points in the first 8 games of the season in the AHL, he was showing the potential that Vegas saw in 2020. Brendan Brisson was really being able to capitalize and take advantage of what Vegas wanted him to become, which is eventually an NHLer at some point with Vegas. So really strong start to the season, a really good momentum to build off of. And November would hit. And November would be kind of a hit and miss for Brendan Brisson. There was 4 games in the month of November where he had no goals, he had no assists. In fact, he had them on back-to-back games. It was on November 4th and November 7th. He had 0 goals, 0 points. And then on November 18th and November 21st, he had back-to-back games with no goals and no points. Well, hopefully this wouldn't be a pattern, right? You're really hoping that for Brendan Brisson, this would not become a trend, considering how good of a start he had in October. So how did Brendan Brisson do in November? Well, he had only 1 assist against Abbotsford on November 3rd. He did get a 2-minute penalty in that game as well. And you're actually going to be picking up on this in this episode. The fact that he had 4 penalty minutes in October, but he's going to have plenty more in November. But he, after having those dry spells on November 4th and November 7th in Colorado on November 8th, Brendan Brisson would have his first 2-assist game of the season. So he would have 2 assists against Colorado, being able to help the Henderson Silver Knights in that situation. And then the next week, November 15th, against Coachella Valley Firebirds, the affiliate of the Seattle Kraken, he would have arguably one of the best games he has had of his career so far up to this point in his professional hockey league career. As on November 15th against Coachella Valley, he would have 1 goal, 2 assists, and 2 penalty minutes, and would help the Henderson Silver Knights do a very good outing against Coachella Valley. And the fact that he had a power play goal on November 15th, so he was really helping out on the power play. He was helping the Henderson Silver Knights when it mattered the most. In fact, it actually would be his second power play goal of the season when he did that against Coachella Valley. But overall, that was a solid game for Brendan Brisson. His line mates were improving off of it. You could tell that the line had chemistry. And when it came to Coachella Valley versus Henderson, Brendan Brisson was showing physicality. He was being able to show that, he can hold his own when it comes to the toughness part of it with Brendan Brisson. But yeah, November 15th against Coachella Valley, a 3-point game for Brendan Brisson, a 3-point game for Brendan. And he was having his best performance of that point in his young professional hockey league career. Well, it's not about, what would he do afterwards, right? What would be the follow-up game as the Abbotsford Canucks would come to the Dollar Loan Center, would come down to Henderson and play a 2-game series? How would Brendan Brisson perform after having a 3-point game? Well, he would end up having another great performance, as on November 17th against Abbotsford Canucks, they would have a 2-goal night for Brisson and 1 power play goal out of those 2. So back-to-back games with a power play goal for Brendan Brisson. 3 goals in a 2-game span. And it's also the same Brendan Brisson that was having at that point 7 points in 3 games. So against Colorado, he had a 2-assist night. He had arguably one of his best games of his career, a 3-point night against Coachella Valley, and then a 2-goal night on the Abbotsford Canucks on November 17th. So 7 points in total among 3 games. This stretch right here was showing that Brendan Brisson was showing progression. This was able to really see and really observe and really show that the Vegas Golden Knights had a player in Brendan Brisson that, as long as he progresses, as long as he develops in the minors, he could be a solid player on the bottom 6 for your Vegas Golden Knights for stretches like this. Now, obviously, he would have a 2 games right afterwards where he had 0 points, like I mentioned earlier. But he would end the month of November as actually he would have back-to-back games with a point, as he would score a goal against the Tucson Roadrunners on November 25th and then have an assist the next night on November 26th. So in the month of November for Brendan Brisson, he would have 4 goals in the month of November. There's also the same Brendan Brisson that ended up having 10 points. So overall, for Brendan Brisson to have 4 goals and 6 assists in the month of November to kind of capitalize off the momentum he had built in October, he was showing and he was progressing as a member of the Henderson Silver Knights. He did really solid in October and November. Now, getting towards the end of 2023, December would be an interesting situation for Brendan Brisson, as he actually would end up having a very memorable game against the Ontario region, but that would be way later in the month of December. Now, one note that I do have to mention about Brendan Brisson in December was his lack of goal scoring. As in the entire month of December, in the dozen games that he had in that month, he only had 1 goal in December. Brendan Brisson, who's a guy who had scored a bunch of goals up to that point in October and November. For him to have only one goal, and that was on December 9th at San Jose for Brennan Brisson, it was a bit suspect. It was a bit puzzling to see a guy who was a goal scorer like Brennan Brisson to have such a drought where at the end of December, he had 7 games in a row where he did not score a goal. But one positive I do have to mention, one positive that if I'm going to tell the story correctly and I'm going to give you the information, even though Brendan Brisson had only one goal during that stretch, he had 6 assists, including 5 games in a row where he had an assist. So being a team player and being able to pass the puck around, being able to get it open, get it to his line mates, get the right read, that was something that Brennan Brisson was showing. And yes, he had only one multi-point game, which was against the San Jose Barracudas on December 9th, where he had a goal and an assist. But for Brennan Brisson, month of December was really about consistency. And the fact that he had 5 games in a row from December 9th to December 22nd, where he had a point in all of those games. So Brennan Brisson was elevating himself as not just one of the best players on the stat sheet in the AHL, not just someone who, if you actually look at the AHL.com, he would be one of the top goal scorers for Henderson on their report line. But for Brennan Brisson to end 2023 up to that point, this is somebody who was doing very solid and had 9 goals towards the end of 2023. A really stellar job by Brennan Brisson. Now, I did mention that he had an interesting game on the final game of 2023, and that was against the Ontario region. And on the Ontario region, he had 6 penalty minutes in that game. And one of the main reasons why is that there's a very iconic photo, a very funny photo on social media of Brennan Brisson with no jersey on, skating around with just his pads and his undershirt and everything like that. And that is because that was a night where all the chaos happened between Ontario and Henderson. Yeah, that was a fun game definitely to listen to and watch. But for Brennan Brisson, to say that his physicality had picked up in Henderson would be an understatement. As just in December alone, Brennan Brisson had 12 penalty minutes in December. So for a player like Brennan Brisson, a first-round pick, a guy who's normally known for shooting the puck and, putting the puck in the back of the net and getting open to his teammates, this was an interesting statistic about Brennan Brisson, is that at that point in 2023, I'm not even talking about the rest of the season, he had 26 penalty minutes in about 25 games. So he was averaging about a penalty minute per game for the Henderson Silver Knights. So for Brennan Brisson, he was showing that he could drop the gloves, he could defend his teammates, he would stick up for his guys, stick up for his line mates if he needed to. And that's a statistic, and that's a characteristic you really want in a locker room. You really want someone who's going to go to bat for you. You really want someone who, if somebody pounds you into the boards, and someone who is going to make sure that you get put on the ground, Brennan Brisson's going to be right there and is going to say, hey, don't do that to my teammate. So Brennan Brisson was showing that he could have some physicality as well as being a goal scorer. Moving into January 2024 for Brennan Brisson, he only had 5 games in Henderson. And there's a reason why, and I'm going to break this down later. But out of those 5 games he had in Henderson for January 2024, he had only 1 goal, 1 point, and 4 penalty minutes. So Brennan Brisson against San Diego had his only point in January in that 5-game stretch that he was playing in Henderson. So overall, not the best news, but it was good for Brennan Brisson because he got to the 10-goal mark for Henderson. So as a member of the Henderson Silver Knights, he had gotten to 10 goals on the season. So 10 out of his 12 goals he did in the Henderson Silver Knights season, he had already done by that point in early January. Also, him having 4 penalty minutes, that means that when it came to Brennan Brisson, this is somebody who hit the 30 penalty minute mark heading into early January. Now, what's the reason why after January 13th against Milwaukee did he no longer have a stretch of time in January for the Henderson Silver Knights? Well, the main reason why Brennan Brisson was no longer on the AHL roster, the reason why he was no longer a member of your Silver Knights, is because on January 17th, Brennan Brisson would be recalled and be sent up to your Vegas Golden Knights. On January 17th, he would be on the ice skating on for the morning skate with your Vegas Golden Knights organization, and you would get prepared and ready for his opening night. He would get prepared mentally and physically for arguably the biggest moment of a young player's career, a moment that any NHL player will never, ever forget. As on January 18th, 2024, against the Nashville Predators, he would have his debut. That's right. He would have his debut against the Nashville Predators and would have a little bit of an impact in that game, as in that debut for the Nashville Predators, he would have 11 minutes on ice. Right. Brennan Brisson would have 11 minutes on ice and would have a -1 plus-minus, but he would take his first ever shot in the NHL. So for a guy who took his rookie lap, where the rest of the team stops and the rookie has to take a lap all by himself in his NHL debut, but against Nashville on that night, he would have his first shot in the NHL. He would have about 11 minutes on ice, and he would be able to show that he had some ability to play for Vegas. Now, after that first game and after those jitters probably wore off for Brennan Brisson, now it was time to get to work. As the next game would be the New York Rangers, he would have one shot once again in only 9 minutes of production. And for Brennan Brisson, at this point in time, he was going to be skating as a middle six forward for your Vegas Golden Knights. Let's make no mistake about it. When it comes to Brennan Brisson, his first 2 games, he was being on a line where, he had a couple of lines mates, some good veteran presence there. But overall, with Brennan Brisson, this was a situation here where he is on a line with a Brett Howden. He is on a line with a Michael Amadio. But what would happen if Brennan Brisson would be teamed up with 2 of the best players in Vegas Golden Knights history? How would Brennan Brisson perform if they put him on a line with Jonathan Marchessault and William Karlsson? Because on January 20th against the Pittsburgh Penguins, he would score his first ever goal in the NHL. This is a career-defining moment for Brennan Brisson. For him personally, there is nothing better than scoring your first ever goal in the NHL. It's also the same Brennan Brisson who got his first ever point in the NHL. So first goal, first point, had a +1 as a plus-minus. And for the first time in his career in the NHL, he would actually play over 12 minutes of ice time for Vegas. And then a couple of games later, the Arizona Coyotes. This would be an interesting situation here. Whereas when it came to Brennan Brisson, when it comes to what he has done as a member of the Vegas Golden Knights, he would have an assist against the Arizona Coyotes on that line with Marchessault and with Carlson. The 1971-81 line, once again back in the starting lineup. He also played 13 minutes in this game, which kind of tied what he did against the Pittsburgh Penguins. But then the next night against the Minnesota Wild, he would have an assist in that game as well. He'd put up multiple shots in that game. And more importantly, for Brennan Brisson, he would get the most ice time in his career up to that point, as he would then add 14 minutes on ice against the Minnesota Wild. So, overall, for Brennan Brisson, his most recent game against the Toronto Maple Leafs, he had an assist in that game as well. So, Brennan Brisson, at this point in time, for the Vegas Golden Knights, for the Henderson Silver Knights, he was playing in 8 games for the Vegas Golden Knights. That is what he has done up to this point. 8 games for the Vegas Golden Knights for Brennan Brisson. He has played around 40 games for the Henderson Silver Knights. But as a player for Brennan Brisson, first goal in the NHL, check. To play with 2 guys who are probably going to have their jersey retired in the rafters for Vegas, and William Karlsson and Jonathan Marchessault, check. And he is now being on the second line for the Vegas Golden Knights. He is now a second line mate. Check. So in a span of a year, Brennan Brisson went from a prospect who did have some question marks. Even I called him out on it. This was a prospect who people were wondering if he was developing. Was he progressing enough to become an NHLer someday? To now, where Brennan Brisson in his 2023-2024 season, in 49 games, if you combine his AHL and NHL stats, Brendan Brisson has had 13 goals, 18 assists for 30 points on the year. So overall, a very solid season for Brennan Brisson. It's also the same Brennan Brisson who has 36 penalty minutes on the year. So for Brennan Brisson, he has shown that he can be physical too. He has shown that he has that physicality. He can be, very physical when need be. But think about that stat line. For everyone who's watching, really stop and analyze what that stat line means when it comes to what he did in the AHL and what he has done in the NHL. Brennan Brisson has scored 12 goals in Henderson alongside his first career NHL goal in Vegas. This is the same Brennan Brisson who in this season for Henderson has become a contributor on the top 6 in Henderson and looks like a guy who could be a very solid player for the Golden Knights organization moving forward. I mean, shoot, should I even talk about what he did in his return game from the AHL? Brendan Brisson, when he gets sent down from Vegas to Henderson, the Henderson Silver Knights, he goes back there. And in his first game back against the Iowa Wild, he has a 2-goal game in his first game back. The next night, he has an assist and a penalty in that game. It's really crazy that when it comes to a guy like Brendan Brisson, it's also the same guy who also in his most recent performance, in his most recent game for the Henderson Silver Knights, had 4 penalty minutes. He had 2 penalties in the same game. So for Brendan Brisson, here is his statistics in Henderson. Like I said before, 12 goals, 26 points, 36 penalty minutes in 41 games. And then his statistics for the Vegas Golden Knights, 1 goal, 4 points, and a -4 in 8 games. So that is overall what's happened with Brendan Brisson. And I just wanted to make this video. I wanted to talk about his progression. How has he performed in 2023, 2024? This is essentially a follow-up video from what we did last year. And, we've done follow-up videos before on this channel. We did a 2017 NHL expansion draft follow-up on this channel. Now we're doing a Brennan Brisson follow-up on this channel. And if you like these and you actually want more of this content, I might even look back at some of the stuff we've done previously in Season 1 and pick some episodes to follow up on in Season 2. So until next time, I'm your host, Ian Kelly. This is Vegas Hockey Hub on PRConnectionsRadio.com, presented by paidperletter.com/Uncle Dan. And until next time, continue watching hockey, go support junior hockey, and go Knights, go.